Hi everyone, we're going to give it a couple of moments before we get started, give people a chance to join. If you joined the last Tech Insights session, you'll know that the first portion is a kind of insights, kind of setting the scene with a couple of presentations, and then we go into wider group discussions where we actively encourage you to put on your camera and unmute your mic and ask your questions, or at least engage in the wider group discussion with our great panelists that we have with us here today. To see some more people joining, so just give them a couple of moments to join before I hand over. And you stop having to listen to my voice. I'm sure you've listened to my voice quite a few times today. Okay. Whilst people are joining, I'm just going to quickly introduce and kind of set the scene for this session. So earlier we kind of looked at exploring what it means to have novel hybrid ingredients on the plant-based side of things, and also looked at functional ingredients in dairy. So in this session, we're moving a little bit over to one of the other food pillars and looking at fats. So how to navigate through the complexity of developing biotech fats and what that means for the industry. So really glad to have Jen Yu here from Lipid, and also have Cheng Feng here from Fiberworks, who will be giving presentations kind of set the scene and sharing their insights on what they think it means to produce an alternative fat. So I'm going to hand over to Jen Yu to start off with his presentation first. Thank you.
Thanks, Jet, for the quick introduction, and welcome everyone to join this session to discuss a little bit deeper in the fat alternative. And I will share a slide, and let me try it. Can you guys see it right now? Yeah, probably pretty good. Yeah. So Lipid, we are making vegan oils to perform like animal fat. So we actually spend a lot of most of our energy in fat alternative, specifically for meat products. And a little bit introduction of myself is that I'm a chemist by training. So I did my PhD in chemical engineering at Cornell. And when I was at Cornell, I was also the commercial fellow. So I actually talked to a lot of folks in the industry to understand what's the problem in the field. And that's why we figure out fat is a big part that are missing right now, but it's very critical. Yeah. So just some numbers. So like fat for hamburgers, it's like 40% it's fat, and for steak, like 30% to 50%. And the funny thing is that if you have more fat in the steak it's kind of like high-end steak. So like Singapore Wagyu beef, they actually have like 50% or 60% fat in it. Yeah, so fat is like second largest component in meat, a lot of meat products. And it's also the key for the vegan meat to taste like a real meat. And this is what we focus on right now, because the problem over here is that basic fat is insufficient. So if you look at what people are using right now, it's mainly coconut oils, palm oils, or hydrogenated oil, and none of them works really like an animal fat, no matter in appearance, texture, or flavors. It's just a big gap over there. It's like missing. And if you look back at the current landscape of like I shouldn't call it alternative protein. I think a better way to describe it is alternative meat or alternative food. You will find out like more than 100 companies trying to do protein part, but less than 5 companies are doing fat alternative last year. But I mean, there are definitely more companies coming out, including us and Thomas. I saw like he's also over here. They are also doing fat alternatives. So there are more and more companies joining this field. But my general comment is that this field is so huge that at this for me right now, I see all of those companies as like not as a competitor, but more like a partners to explore this new field, because there are so many things we can achieve. Like in protein, there are soy protein, pea protein, chickpea protein, and right now moving to fermentation, and even further like to fungi and mycelium and to cell culturing. I mean, you can find out even in protein, there are at least 10 different type of protein. And I think the similar things will happen in the fat alternative. you will probably find out 10 or 20 different type of fat alternative or functional fat in this area. So that's why I think that the opportunity is pretty huge, but not many people are doing it right now. But when we are talking about that, we think about a lot on the fermentation of fat, but like I have two things I want to bring out in this discussion and I think that's our insight. That's what we find very. We think a lot of it, but and the challenge over here is like the first question we keep asking ourselves is, what's the target? So like fat is not like protein. Like if you look at protein in milk, it's probably casein or whey protein. So you have a very specific molecules you want to produce either by precision fermentation or by fermentation of like nature microbes. But fat is different. Fat usually is a profile. It's not like you get one specific type of chemical structure or chemical like molecules, then you can mimic the flavor or mimic the key functionality. Fat is a combination of several different lipids profile to create those type of flavors or texture and mouthfeel. So that's the first challenge we see in the field is that if we want to use fermentation is a very powerful approach, but it's in the end it's still an approach. You have to tell it like others, or you have to give it a specific target, like what type of molecules or what type of lipids that you are trying to create or produce by fermentation. And that's in general, I think the very challenging part over here is that people don't know it's a good profile or like what type of profile works well. You probably couldn't mimic the 100% as a like a, if you're trying to make a butter, it's hard to mimic 100% of all fat profile. But if you want to pick like 10% of it, what's the 10% of fat you are trying to mimic? That's kind of like the hard thing over here that people need to think more in the field. And the second thing is, I think people in general miss or doesn't talk about it. It's actually in downstream. So if you look at the fat, not in the fat, but if you look at the fermentation of protein, I think people actually spend a lot of energy and cost structure in downstream, like separation of your products. And I think it will happen the same in the fat alternative. And a very good industry to look at is actually in biopharmaceutical industry. So their cost profile have like 60% in downstream. So it's not in upstream, it's not in manufacturing or production. A lot of the cost structure is actually putting money into purify the products. So that's also one thing I think for people like us or people have interest in doing fermentation of fat or creating fat alternative have to think more about it. It's not like I mean, a lot of people are trying to find screening through different microbes or creating different combination of microbes, but we also have to think about downstream because in the end, when we bring the product into the market, have to think about the cost, and the cost will be pretty surprising if you are going to separate it in a like a very purified way. Yeah, but maybe in the end we don't need to really get a very purified products, but if we are going to get a specific molecules or a specific profile that we are aiming for, then we need to think about separation. Yeah, so that's kind of like the two key insights that I think people in general miss or doesn't think a lot in the field. And I would like to spend the rest of the time on talking about what we are creating in Lipid that probably share some perspective or like what's the alternative fat that we are creating and how we think about it. Yeah, so we are creating a fat alternative mainly made with vegan oils right now. And the reason is pretty straightforward because first, the cost structure is lower. And the second thing is that we think it as like a step-by-step progress, but not like a jump. If you look at how protein, like the world of protein progress, like move forward, it starts from soy protein and pea protein. So they start from the plant ingredients. then moved to like precision fermentation of whey protein and casein protein, and right now moving to cell culturing. So it's a step-by-step progress. But in fact, in general, what we see is that people jump through like just jump through like the plant ingredient one. They directly jump into fermentation or cell culturing. It's not bad. It's just like we see a lot of still see a lot of opportunity to use plant ingredient to make a fat alternative. And if we can make a fat alternative with plant ingredient, the advantage is the cost structure is pretty good, and the scale up is also over there already. So we are making phytofat with vegan oils, but it performs like animal fat in terms of melting behavior and texture. And not only like the melting behavior and texture, the other advantage that we see a lot that couldn't be done by fermentation or cell culturing is actually nutritional profile. So if you are going to do fermentation or cell culturing to generate the same fat as animal fat, the same problem will come out as like you have a lot of saturated fat in it, or even I won't say trans fat. Trans fat it's in the hydrogenated oil that people are using today. So in general, like you will have a lot of saturated fat in your products. But if you are using vegan oils like olive oils, which is pretty healthy, or high oleic acid oil, it's also pretty healthy. You can actually reduce like 7% of saturated fat in the products. So it means that this type of fat alternative can actually provide a better nutritional labels for those plant-based food. And improving nutritional profile is pretty important because first, consumer is aware about it, and second, people do a pretty poor job on it today. Like for Impossible or Beyond, they actually have a pretty similar saturated fat composition comparing with real beef. So that's kind of like, I still remember last week or 2 weeks ago, I went to supermarket buying Beyond Burgers. We keep buying it because I like their products too. And they actually market their products as like 30% less saturated fat comparing with their previous products. So I think even those big folks, they see this as a trend that they want to reduce saturated fat to really make their plant-based food or like their products healthy, really healthy, healthier than traditional beef or traditional meat products. So that's in general, I think the other perspective that people are trying to achieve is like to improve the nutritional labels. Yeah. And for us, as a company, as Lipid, we do this fat with vegan oils, and we are already in a production scale. Like we are moving to like around tons production in the past few months. So we move up from kilograms to tons in less than 3 months, and that's the same as our expectations. We say when we do design all this progress, one of the advantages I mentioned is that we see the scalability that is pretty compatible, or like not like the limitation in fermentation or cell culturing by bioreactor. Is actually by the product design itself. If you can do the products with plant ingredients, usually you can scale it up pretty quickly. And the same as our expectation, we are already scaling up to tons production. So in current stage, we feel pretty comfortable to send out a lot of samples to our partners. And we are actually working with more than 10 partners right now. So that's a pretty good sign. And not only making meatballs, those type of ground minced meat products, we are also moving forward to work with whole cut meat. So that's another things that we think a good fat alternative can enable. It's like new products on the market. So people right now focus on product with a lot of protein, but in the end, a lot of meat products, it's a combination of high fat and high protein. So bacon is a very good example, but they are just a lot more like pork belly, like wagyu beef, marbling steak, or even salami, like charcuterie products. So, and even seafood products, they need a lot of fat to mimic the flex and the whitish part of it. So I think a good fat alternative can also enable a lot of different new products on the market that people couldn't achieve before. So that's what I'm trying to share today, and happy to discuss more. Yeah. And if not, we can move to Chanfeng and probably discuss later on in the Q&A session.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I think that's great. If we move on to Tenfeng to give your insights, then we can kind of collate all the questions and kind of go through the group discussion a bit later on. So hand over to you, Tenfeng.
Sounds good. Great presentation, Jenny. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for the invitation to this event. And today I'm really happy to tell you more about our technology and the company. It's going to be a slightly twisted flavor. I'm going to talk a lot about protein since we are at Fiberworks. We are really developing a precision fermentation-based meat protein to help food companies to formulate better tasting, better texture, better nutrition, and affordable meat alternatives. So to this audience, we all know the problem of traditional animal agriculture and the health risk, environmental impact that's associated with it. So we all feel very urgent to reduce and replace meat consumption so that we can really eat in a sustainable and responsible way. So Jenny gave a great introduction about the fact, and if we so the holy grail to a great meat alternative is really to replicate that authentic meaty taste. And if you dissect these meaty taste a little bit, it really has three main elements for red meat, especially. So on the top, and they shape like a pyramid. At the top is blood that gives it really the color and unique taste. And in the middle, like lipids will fit very well there. That the animal fat, like you said, really gives the meat its unique flavor, and especially when just for some meat products, give like the marbling steak and bacon really give them a main taste and mouthfeel. And the base at the base of this pyramid is meat protein that really everybody's very familiar with. That really gives the meat its main texture, its taste, and its nutrition. So the main current technology out there really, well, for making real animal protein, mostly relied on cellular agriculture, which is great. But well, at Fiberworks, we're actually taking a slightly different approach to make this protein using precision fermentation. And when we think about this market, obviously the meat market is huge. The plant-based meat also grows exponentially almost from merely 14% in 2019 to 19% in 2020. So consumers love plant-based meat, but they don't love the complex labeling, the long ingredient in the plant-based meat. And they have to rely heavily on texturizing additives such as methylcellulose to improve, to get that texture right. So if we look at a typical label, if you look at the ingredient on the right, it's usually a long laundry list of things, and consumers don't love that. And almost universally, you'll find the methylcellulose in them, which is a key additive that helps the plant pea protein or soy protein get to that the desired gelling property and the texture. So at Fiberworks, we're taking a different approach using fermentation-based approach to make this meat protein to replace these methylcellulose and other hydrocolloid-based additives. How the process works is that we synthesize the muscle protein encoding DNA and put them in the edible microbial host. Through fermentation, we grow this meat protein, so like a beer brewing or brewed meat. Then we extract this meat protein and then cross-link with plant-based protein to give them the meaty texture. So you might ask, why do we need to do that with fermentation? Well, here's an illustration of how fast different cell lines grow in 24 hours from one single cell. So from cow, you get 2 cells. From chicken, you get 4 cells in 24 hours. From fungus, you get thousands of cells. And if you start from yeast or bacteria, you get billions and trillions of cells. So by using the microbes on the right, we can really harness the productivity of these microbes. And by no means we're aimed to replace cultivated meat, but rather we think we all have a role to play to meet these consumer demands. And at Fiberworks, our competitive advantages really are threefold. One is our IP position, so we're really the world's first company to make real meat protein via precision fermentation for food companies, for food ingredients. And also we have a proprietary downstream process that we can purify this protein in a robust and very scalable way. And finally, we have a low-cost structure because these microbial medium are a lot cheaper, and the growth, as I showed before, are very robust and scalable. So our business model is really B2B, serving the food ingredient company on the left, and also the CPG companies on the right. So the company was incorporated last year, and this year we really validated the commercial case and the technical feasibility, and filed the IP around it, and validate them at bench scale. And our milestone for next year is really to get to a pilot scale and start the regulatory filing, and reach commercial launch by 2023. And really get to exponential growth by 2025. So here are the some exciting results we got this summer. So we really made the world's first fermentation-based real meat protein. The whole process only takes 3 days. So the raw product, meat product, looks like this on the left. It's kind of translucent, kind of like chicken. And when you cook it, actually the color also changes to a white, very chicken-like color. And the whole process of cooking is very much like cooking a piece of meat. It shrinks and curls. And also the texture is very fibrous and very close to the muscle protein, the meat texture. So we're really excited about that. So we're a small team of seasoned innovators and entrepreneurs, and I'm an industrial microbiologist by training. We have a combined of over 50 years of experience in muscle protein biochemistry. Our current funding coming from the Brain Accelerator, Big Eye Venture, and National Science Foundation. I think that's all I'd like to share with you today. Happy to answer any of the questions you might have, and looking forward to working with many of you to advance this industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for presentation. At this point, I'd like to invite anyone who'd like to ask any questions or join the main group discussion to put on their camera. And raise their hand if they have a question or they have a comment they would like to discuss. This is the wider group discussion. So just to remind everyone, the topic is that we are looking at how to navigate through complexity of delivering biotech-based fats. If you do have a question that you prefer to ask via the chat function, you can do that by opening the chat box at the bottom. I can see a couple of people started to join. That's great. Encourage more people to turn on their camera. I'm sure some of you joined the previous session, and it was good to kind of get those discussion points in. I can see Anna already has her hand raised as well. I'm just going to kick off with just kind of just putting it out there, like, what do you see as being, I guess, the interesting processes that people are taking and looking at, having new alternative fats in the space, and keen to get your thoughts on it, Jenny, but also open it out to the wider audience as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In general, like I want to give a quick comment on this, is that I think based on my background in chemical engineering, when we do research back in school, a lot of people are actually doing precision fermentation. So when I think about fat alternative, I actually also think about like genetic engineer microbes to produce specific fat. That's my early like concept over here. But what I find out pretty interesting is like what people like Thomas are doing, or like I think some other folks are doing, but not in fat, but maybe in other area, is trying to use nature microbes and to make a culture of it, or like a combination of different type of microbes. By those different combination, you kind of like cook the microbes together to produce specific products. That's pretty interesting route to me, and I'm pretty optimistic about this route. And I feel curious about it. I couldn't find a lot of papers on it at this point, but I think this can be a pretty interesting thing that was more kind of like awareness. Yeah, that's kind of like one thing I want to mention. Yeah.
Great. Thomas, I don't know if you wanted to add a comment on.
Yeah, thank you very much for the shout out, you. I was actually a bit more, if I can start ready with a question, to ask a little bit more, if I can know more, a little bit more how you do your magic of making it solid. And like the thing that comes to my mind, the easy closest would be Apogee, and how they add this propoxyl group to the fat, to making also lower the caloric content, and if you're doing something similar.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And actually we don't. So we are not chemically modifying any molecules. We are actually doing a physical approach to change the rheological properties of fat products. Yeah. So the concern is also pretty obvious, is if you are chemically modifying anything, then you have to pass through all the regulatory, and also like the commercialization will also be tougher in terms of like the challenge from consumer perspective, and like their feelings, right? Not even just consumer, but also regulatory part. Yeah.
Anna, do you want to? Oh yeah, I see you wanted to go ahead.
Great to see so many familiar faces here. And so yeah, I'm Anna. Good evening from Paris to everyone on this session, from Sofinova Partners, analyst at the Industrial Biotech team. So very curious to hear about both of you, FiberWorks and lipid progress. I don't want to start a friendly competition here, but since we're talking about the alternative protein products, texture seems to be one of the challenges. So it's always interesting how, and since we are kind of in the frames of either fats or proteins, or sometimes even carbohydrates, meaning starch or you name it. So how do these different ingredients contribute to the texture from your point of view, and which of these ingredients is not the most critical, because in some sense all of them are critical, but what brings the flavor basically, and what to your point of view is the most important and unmet challenge currently?
I can probably go first. And flavor is an art. Flavor is not by carbohydrate or by single molecules, or by you kind of like, when people think about flavor, when they talk about flavor, they usually think that probably if you find some key ingredients like heme, then you can have a pretty good flavors. But that's not true. flavor is a combination of a lot of different molecules, and when they react together, they can release those type of aromas or different flavors. I mean, it's hard to explain, but it's like a combination of a lot of things. And so if you look at flavors, actually, it's not only like in the oil or only in the water. It's actually things in the hypophilic phase and also lipophilic phase, and their reaction when you heat it up, when you cook the meat. That's why you couldn't have a strong, you won't have a strong flavor before cooking. The flavor comes out when you cook the meat products. And that means that when you heat up the temperature, the reaction in between oil phase and water phase, and the protein in water react with the degradation of oil. Like, so that's how they provide so many different like flavoring chemicals and compounds. And people usually screen through those flavoring compounds, but I think there are probably some missing. That's just my feeling, that probably something is still missing. We can probably find out one or two, or we can describe it in some ways, but I just keep feeling that we need to spend more energy and research into understanding the flavors in the meat. Yeah. So for flavors, I think it's hard because it's not just one thing, it's that a mix. If you are going to mix a lot of things, then it will be pretty challenging. Yeah. And that's bring out to my next question for Chen Feng. Did you try your meat? I'm pretty curious. That's actually what I'm trying to understand. Is like when you try your proteins, did you give, does look like the chicken, look like chicken stuff? Does it has the chicken flavors or any flavors in it?
Yeah, we actually tried it. It's relatively mild, but it's surprisingly good. It's a lot better than what we expected. Admittedly, there's probably room for improvement, but yeah, overall we are very satisfied. And to Anna's question, it's funny that you asked that, and Jianyu and I actually were talking about that pre-session, and we think it'll be a great match if we can combine the two components, the fat and the protein, especially for some of the applications like bacon or salami or steak. Those will be great applications. So yeah, I totally agree with what Jenny said. It's really a combination. I think I showed that pyramid. It's really a combination of, for red meat, it's the blood and the fat and the protein. So they all come together that give you that unique meaty flavor or texture. But yeah, after talking to these food companies, you're absolutely right. And they all bring up the, I was told that really that they can get the flavor right. So the meaty flavor, it's easier to simulate, but the texture is really the holy grail to a great meaty product. And the protein we're making actually are the texture, are responsible for the meaty texture in muscle protein. That's why we think our product actually tastes quite meaty. To Jenny's point, but yeah, absolutely. Probably takes the heme, the fat, and the protein all together to create a full meaty eating experience. I don't know if Jenny, you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's actually what I'm pretty optimistic about cell culturing, because as a scientist, if it's too hard to replicate how nature build those flavoring system, one way to do it is like we don't think about how to, like we don't figure out what's specifically in those meat products. We just reproduce the meat. So maybe cell culturing can solve those flavoring issues by nature, because they are just directly reproduce everything they got in the meat, right? Yeah, so I really like cell culturing in that way, but of course, like the other downside is like the cost structure will always be tough. Yeah, it's specifically we are talking about food. Food is, people care a lot in even penny and cents, right? So that's all. There will always be hard for like advanced technology and to bring it into mainstream. Yeah.
thanks for your answers. I was expecting that the pie is going to start. I mean, Chen Yu is going to say fats are more important for the texture, obviously, and you're going to say like, no, it's proteins, it's proteins, to make it more interactive. But I'm satisfied with the response anyway, so thank you.
Yeah, but fat is important for the texture, and we should ask Thomas about that.
I completely agree, and I think, as I mentioned in my previous session, I think especially fat is like underserved as an industry. We have developed a lot on alternative proteins, maybe not the fibrillar that Chanfeng is working on, but in general, as Jamie was saying, we have a plethora of 10, 20 different kinds of proteins that we can mix and match. With fat, we have pretty much palm and coconut oil, and that's it. And we are a handful of startups trying to develop solutions.
Right. We are coming up to time, but there is time for any more questions or any more comments that if anyone wants to, you can ask them directly by putting your camera on and unmute yourself. But also, if you prefer to kind of write it in the chat and kind of listen into the answer, feel free to do that as well. Whilst I wait for maybe one last question, just a thought or a comment from me. So, I mean, going on Anna's question, kind of asking around flavor and texture, and that comes up quite a bit in terms of being important. On the nutrition side of developing these fats, how important is it when you're kind of having the conversations with these brands about addressing the nutrition value of the products that they're putting together? Is that number 2 on the list, or is that a bit further down, or is that more of the nutrition side is coming more from the consumer?
Yeah, I can probably go first. I think it's definitely number 2 for those companies who we are talking with. They still care more about whether it tastes good or whether it tastes like the product they are trying to replace. But I want to mention that we also talk with a lot of consumers, and for those people who change their eating behaviors from eating animal meat to plant-based meat or alternative protein, health is probably number 1 for them. Sometimes they don't really care whether the vegan meat tastes like a real meat or not. They care more about whether it is really healthier or not. They would like to change their behavior because they feel like it's a way. It's like a way to live. So they kind of willing to compromise a bit on the eating experience, but they want to have a healthy life and also healthy, more sustainable to the planet. So I think nutritional profile is very important to consumers, and it will just be more and more be a bigger part of it, that brand will in the end have to think about it or be forced to change their nutritional labels. And we are already seeing that happening. That's why I mentioned that Beyond actually marketing their products as less saturated fat, 30% less saturated fat comparing with their previous products. And not only Beyond, I mean, a lot of brands are starting to make a clean labels, like as Chanfeng mentioned in his talk. Traditionally, in their probably first version of their products, they have 100 ingredients in their nutritional labels. But right now, people are trying to make clean labels. They are cutting a lot of ingredients out. They don't want methylcellulose, or they don't want some weird stuff they add into it in before. And that's all about nutritional. I do have a lot of friends, when they shop around those vegan meats, they actually look the nutritional ingredients pretty carefully. And that's pretty surprising to me. Yeah, people do care about that.
Yeah, that's is a little bit of a segue into the technology panel, because that's all around clean labels and what that actually means in terms of ingredients from the consumer perspective, but also in terms of an innovation side as well. So really interesting to hear your thoughts on that. And Thank you to everyone for joining this session, and thank you Denyu and Chen-Feng for sharing your company insights and how it relates to kind of, you know, the next innovations in fats and related in terms of like moving into like parallels with fats, I'd say, with FiberWorks. And thank you Anna and Thomas for your great questions and comments in this discussion. I hope you all enjoyed this discussion. Just to note, because I've had a couple of people ask me about Thomas's session, which was earlier on, about functional ingredients in dairy. It has been recorded, so I apologize again for the technical difficulties and people not being able to join that session, but it will be on the platform either in the next hour or first thing tomorrow morning to be able to watch that discussion on the main platform. So thank you to Denyu and Chen-Feng for joining us, and thank you everyone again, and I'll see you again in just under 20 minutes for our final technology panel of the day. Thank you.